Hi everyone, this is your host John and I welcome you back to another episode of the Subcontinent. Our program focuses on the South Asian region and aims to address critically important issues, particularly of the subcontinent. This region hosts almost 25% of the global population, and with the help of our team and experts, we will try to discuss, dissect, explain, and analyze issues which affect the everyday lives of the people living in this diverse melting pot. Please stay with us.
In this edition of the Subcontinent, we delve into the largest protest in the world by Indian farmers that's been going on for months, with no break and no end in sight. And we will discuss the reasons behind the protests and its repercussions for the country.
Indian farmers began their protest last year and it's gaining even more momentum this year. The farmers are protesting against 3 farm acts which were passed by the parliament last September. These acts, often called the farm bills, have been described anti-farmer laws by many farmer unions, while some see them as necessary measures for the future of the industry. Farmers say they want reforms that wouldn't leave them at the mercy of the corporates.
Indian farmers started their protests locally soon after the government announced fundamental changes on how agricultural products are produced, stored and sold throughout India. About 2 months into the protests and no practical response from New Delhi, farmer unions, notably from Punjab and Haryana, began a movement named Let's Go to Delhi to make the government hear their voices. At this point, tens of thousands of farming union members have embarked upon a march towards the nation's capital. But late in November, a nationwide general strike gathered approximately 250 million people in support of the farmers, while hundreds of thousands of farmers were converging at various border points on the way to Delhi.
Farmers, mainly from Punjab, but also joined by others. The farmers in Punjab, it's a basically agricultural community, and Punjab provides rice, wheat to almost the rest of India. It's where it's a very fertile land, and they grow. They are very hard-working people, so it is their life and bread. And now, with the passage of some laws in Indian Parliament, they see it nothing less than attack on their livelihood, because if they are left at the mercy of the big corporate houses without proper safeguards on the minimum support price, then they think where it will eventually end. And they are a proud people. Sikhs are proud people. Their diaspora is scattered all around the world, and they are very resourceful. They don't want to be heading to a future where they see that they will be humiliated, and they have at the moment, they are producing a lot, they live a good life, and they don't want to be going to a future, push to a future which they see miserable for them.
Modi is anti-farmer in the hands of the corporates. So he is changing these laws for the corporates. So it will be definitely not in the favor of the farmers.
I came here on the basis of humanity and with the belongings to all my brothers and sisters, the farmers who are sitting over here from last 2.5 months. I feel so much depressed, so much regression for the government, for the Modi government, that they are not even listening to them.
Late in 2020, the government tried to end the protests through some minor changes on new pollution laws and dropping amendments to the new electricity ordinance. However, about a month later, in late January, the protests entered a new phase when tens of thousands of the farmers held a parade with a large convoy of tractors towards Delhi. The tractor rally deviated from the planned routes permitted by the police and turned violent. Many people were injured or arrested as the protesting farmers drove through the barricades and clashed with the police.
ಕಾರಣಕ್ಕೂ ಪೊಲೀಸರು ಈ ರೀತಿ ನಮ್ಮನ್ನು ಹತ್ತಿಕ್ಕಿ ಚಳವಳಿಯನ್ನು ನಿಲ್ಲಿಸಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಸಾಧ್ಯ ಆಗೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಈ ದೊಡ್ಡ ಆಂದೋಲನವಾಗಿ ಈ ಚಳವಳಿ ಪ್ರಾರಂಭವಾಗ್ತದೆ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಯಾವುದೇ ಕಾರಣಕ್ಕೂ ನಾವು ಈ ಚಳವಳಿಯನ್ನು ನಿಲ್ಲಿಸೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ನಾವು ಮತ್ತೆ ಬಿಟ್ಟ ಮೇಲೆ ಬೀದಿಗೆ ಬರ್ತೀವಿ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಈ ಒಂದು ಪೊಲೀಸ್ ಕ್ರಮಕ್ಕೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಧಿಕ್ಕಾರ.
The Indian government vehemently maintains that the changes in the agriculture industry are not only necessary but also way past due. However, farmers, especially those with smaller lands, need reassurances that the new policies would not crash them into poverty. Proponents of the measures, mostly Modi supporters, argue that the reforms will make it effortless for farmers to sell their produce directly to big buyers, and insist that the protests are based on misinformation. To clearly see all the angles to the problem, we have to look at the agriculture in the subcontinent through a wider historical and political perspective.
Following the anthropogenic Bengal famine back in 1943, when the food shortage killed over 3 million people, India began taking steps to prevent another disaster and end the country's reliance on foreign food aid. India kept expanding the amount of farming land until 1967 and the beginning of the Green Revolution. Under premiership of Congress leader Indira Gandhi, it converted traditional farming into an industrial system due to the adoption of modern methods and technology, such as the use of high-yielding variety seeds, double cropping, tractors, pesticides, fertilizers, and huge government-funded irrigation projects. Then comes the golden age of the Agricultural Produce Market Committee, which was created to ensure farmers are safeguarded from exploitation by large retailers. The committee made a set of regulations that ensured prices do not reach unreasonably high levels and guaranteed timely payments to farmers for their crops. In exchange, farmers were only allowed to sell their agriculture produce in designated market yards called mandis. This was the preferred modus operandi until Modi's reforms.
India has a long history of farmers revolting against the rulers. In British India, farmers famously held protests when colonial rulers wanted to force them to grow opium or indigo. Currently, over 600 million Indians depend on the agriculture industry, and the sector constitutes a hefty chunk of the country's GDP. But over 85% of India's farmers own lands smaller than a few hectares and are especially vulnerable against private players and giant landowners. Modi, who had promised to double farmers' income by 2022, is on course to help big corporations render their way of life obsolete and push them deeper into poverty.
Farmers do not trust government's assurances for a fair sale system or a guaranteed minimum price for some essential commodities. It is understandably difficult to believe a government that clearly favors a national framework for agriculture sector based on modern models at the expense of smaller players. But it is impossible to believe in the well-intentions of a government that orders police and law enforcement of various states to attack the farmers' gatherings with water cannons, batons and tear gas.
ಕೇಂದ್ರ ಸರ್ಕಾರ ರೈತ ವಿರೋಧಿ ಮಸೂದೆಗಳನ್ನು ಏನು ಜಾರಿ ಮಾಡಿದೆ ಅದನ್ನು ವಾಪಸ್ ತಗೋಬೇಕು. ಪೊಲೀಸರ ದಬ್ಬಾಳಿಕೆ ಮೂಲಕ ರೈತ ಚಳವಳಿಯನ್ನು ಹತ್ತಿಕ್ಕುವಂತ ಕ್ರಮ ಖಂಡನಾರ್ಹ. ಇದೇ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಕಾರ್ಮಿಕ ಸಂಹಿತೆಗಳನ್ನು ಸಹ ಬದಲು ಮಾಡಿದೆ. ದೇಶಕ್ಕೆ ಬೆಲೆ ಏರಿಕೆ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದೆ. ಈ ಎಲ್ಲ ಕಾಯ್ದೆಗಳನ್ನು ಹಿಂದಕ್ಕೆ ಪಡಿಬೇಕು. ಇಲ್ಲದೆ ಹೋದರೆ ಮತ್ತಷ್ಟು ಬಲಿಷ್ಠವಾದಂಥ ಜನಾಂದೋಲನದೊಂದಿಗೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಸಂಘಟನೆಗಳು ಒಟ್ಟಾಗಿ ನಾವು ಹೋರಾಟ.
The government has charged union leaders with sedition and built massive concrete blockades around the farmers' congregations outside New Delhi. It has cut internet, electricity and water to make life unbearable for the farmers who have blocked the road to the capital. But these hard-working people already had precarious lives.
nobody can be blamed except the government itself. Government is doing something which is against its interest and against India's interest. So ultimately they will lose, and none of them will benefit. At the moment, some opposition parties are supporting farmers, and they may get some temporary benefit. They may get more in touch with people, or they may enhance their presence in public. But that is a temporary gain that won't last. Actually, nobody in the system will gain.
They now find their current jobs and their future at risk, and know that given the shrinking economy on the backdrop of the devastating impacts of the pandemic, alternative careers wouldn't be emerging. They do not seem to be afraid of the cold or hot weather, and most likely they won't budge until the laws are repealed.
कितने दौर हो गया और कितने देर कराएगा वो, कितने बैठक लेंगे, जरूरत नहीं, इसको देना ही नहीं, इसको करना नहीं, तो चले जाएंगे, उसको परेशान करेंगे तो वो घर वापस चले जाएंगे. उसको लगता हूँ कि कब तक बैठेंगे, कितने दिन बैठेंगे, उसको सरकार का ऐसा लगता हूँ.
Already enraged that the farmers keep defying the government, Modi and his ruling Hindu nationalist Bharatiya Janata Party became extra furious when international celebrities started to raise awareness about the plight of the farmers. Now, the government has allegedly resorted to measures like arresting activists and blocking Twitter access for the farmers, as well as weaponizing an army of internet trolls to attack anybody who supports the protests. Such moves have backfired and further morphed the protests into a wider movement against the government's authority.
I find it interesting to see the response that is coming from the BJP supporters and the supporters of India's ruling party on Twitter to Rihana's tweet, for instance. They're asking, is Rihana Muslim? Okay, so they're displaying their Islamophobia and their fascism to the entire world.
Farmers don't seem to be yielding to pressure, as they have made a new home along the highways to Delhi. They are living in makeshift settlements or camping tents, and have even created malls and a newspaper, Trolley Times. The Modi government has delayed the implementation of the laws for 18 months, but the farmers say they keep protesting until their demands are met. The unions have brought water tankers for the protesters and say they have supplies for 6 months. Farmers, who are perhaps the most patient people on earth, can probably live there forever.
ये जो आंदोलन है चलता रहेगा. 2024 से ज़्यादा तो सरकार के पास भी समय नहीं है, इसलिए आंदोलन को हम पीछे हटने वाले नहीं हैं.
Economists have talked about these reforms for decades, but nobody had dared to initiate them. To transition to a more diversified modern economy, India needs to generate non-farm jobs. But over 1 million jobs should be created every month just to stay in the same place. This not only threatens Modi's political future, but also in an ultimate test of India's democratic structure.
This is the problem with that part of the world, and of course India included, that they understand democracy as a sort of dictatorship of the majority. Whosoever is in majority, they can do anything, which is not true. Democracy means that they have to govern the country and take people along with them. It is a participatory form of government, and that would mean that when the people to whom the law relates, when the people come out in protest, government tells them that we have done something good for you. They say, no, you have done something bad for us. Now, in this situation, they should talk. And there have been more than one session of talking. Nothing is coming up because government is not budging. Government is not doing anything which can solve this. So if the farmers are not happy, government should rethink. It should go through again, and it should see if the laws are in the interest of farmers or not. And if not, they can repeal it. There's no problem. That government should not stand by its prestige. That's not the right way of. That's not a proper pro-people way of governing the country.
Modi's government, which has been recurrently accused of steamrolling dissent and showing no respect for minorities, is in a peculiar quagmire. These protests have gathered people from different religions and castes in the same camps, a rare scene in India. Farmers have brought forth the democratic urges of all the people that have been suppressed increasingly over the last 6 years.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we now have Ms. Mercy Baker, who is an economic analyst from Leesburg. Ms. Baker, welcome to the program. So, why have the Indian farmers been protesting for months, and what are their demands?
Well, the farmers in India have been moving on the streets in protest since November 2020 up through February. After last year, the Modi government pushed through 3 new agriculture laws. They signed them in September, and they open up the farmers' income to gouging by the major world food cartels, that is Nestle, Unilever, and many others, and overturn the decades of farm support mechanisms for the farmers, of how their prices can be determined, how their agriculture products are marketed. So this is intolerable for the farmers of India, and they've taken to the streets to say these laws must be cancelled.
Okay, so these protests have been going on for months, like you said. What did the government exactly do to upset these farmers that they've come across going on for months? And what has it done to address their issues?
Now, the Modi government has had at least 10 meetings with leaders of the protesting farm groups from November through early February in 2021. But the Modi government, with the cartels, the agriculture cartels behind it, it only has offered to suspend the 3 new offensive agriculture laws for 18 months. And the farmers say, no, they must be canceled. There must be a system in India that's in both the interests of the farmers and the non-farmers of the 1.3 billion people.
Ms. Baker, before moving ahead and asking you other questions, let's just take a quick look at how the global media has covered this situation, and then we can continue.
Farming employs more than 50% of India's workforce. Many feel the sector is in need of an overhaul and modernization, in particular so it can adapt to the challenges of global heating. Indian farmers, 85% of whom own fewer than 5 acres of land, have long struggled with poverty and debt, and suicide rates are high. In 2019, nearly 10,300 farmers killed themselves. This isn't the first time that large protests have rocked India, the world's largest democracy, but this time it poses a unique challenge for Modi. Agriculture is the primary source of livelihood for about 58% of India's 1.3 billion residents, and farmers are the biggest voter bloc in the country, making farming a central political issue. Angering the farmers could see Modi lose a significant chunk of votes at the next general election in 2024. It is a question of farmers' livelihood, do or die, said Dharmendra Malik, a spokesman for the influential Indian Farmers Union. Since the violent clashes between protesters and police on Republic Day, Modi has taken a tougher stance, calling the demonstrators part of an international conspiracy. The BJP has also sought to stoke divisions among the farmers, likening the protesters to kulaks, wealthy peasants targeted as exploitative class enemies of poorer farmers in the former Soviet Union. Over the past few years, however, the rise of right-wing authoritarianism has brought India's democratic standing into question. India has plummeted in democracy metrics across the board, including the Press Freedom Index, where it now ranks 142 of 180 countries, 4 spots behind South Sudan and 3 behind Myanmar. The Human Freedom Index ranks India at 111 of 162 countries. This past September, human rights group Amnesty International ceased operations in India following sustained assaults from the Indian government. Indian police arrested environmental activist named Disha Ravi in the southern city of Bangalore for allegedly helping activist Greta Thunberg for what they are calling a possible criminal conspiracy to support the months-long farmer protests in India. Indian authorities said the woman shared an online toolkit which Thunberg initially posted on Twitter that describes ways people can help and bring attention to the Indian farmers who are demanding the repeal of new farm laws.
Welcome back, Ms. Baker, and thank you for staying with us. So, Ms. Baker, moving ahead, you talked about cartels and the government only offering to suspend the law for 18 months for the farmers as a relief, but of course that's no use for them, so they didn't agree. I'm wondering, what is the global impact of these protests and what do they represent?
The farmers in India who have taken to the streets in protest are actually fighting against the cancerous system that's run out of Wall Street and London that's based on cartel control of basics like food and energy and based on speculation. So what they are up against in India in the farm protest is fighting for the principle of the sovereignty of national government to determine what kind of pricing to have and what kind of production in the agriculture sector should exist. This has been traditionally called parity pricing. It should be fair for the farmers and it will be food security for the other non-farming citizens alike. Every nation has that right.
Okay, who are the most affected by these reforms? Who will be benefiting from the protests or the chaos in the sector?
Now, the farmers who are protesting in India are suffering hardship with their families, but they are protesting for a principle, so they are part of the front line in the world against the cartels and the impoverishing of farmers and non-farmers alike. India represents a great deal of world food production. It's the biggest, it's the second biggest wheat and rice producer, a big cotton producer. So any disruption to India's agriculture affects the world, not just Indians. And finally, the only benefit out of this is some wrongful benefit by the opposition parties to Modi. Instead, there should be an agriculture policy in India that benefits all of Indians and part of the world picture.
All right, thank you so much, Ms. Baker. It was nice having you here with us. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we had. Viewers, now let's see how people on social media have reacted to the protests across India.
Preeti Chaudhary blames those who are silent on the protests and considers them as the helpers of the powerful. Also, Navu criticizes those who are not with the protests and actually calls them the suppressors of the people's voice. This tweet by Rihanna, the famous American celebrity and singer, attracted considerable attention among the Indians and was very well received by them. Richard Wolff refers to the Indian general strike and suggests that the AFL-CIO should also mobilize American workers to protest the same policies in the US. Harja Bangal believes that neither the new laws nor the previous system is in the interest of the farmers and they need to be repealed and reconsidered.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was our episode about the largest protest in the world by the Indian farmers. To watch bits of our episodes and for more updates, follow us on our social media platforms and please make sure to give us feedback about what you think. We'll meet the same time, same day next week. Thanks for watching.